Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Dark Water Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins in the year 2073, when most islands far from the mainland had been deeply developed by humans. However, there were still many indigenous people living in the dense jungles. One night in a village, the tribespeople hung a huge rock from a freshwater pipeline. The chieftain shot an arrow at the rope holding the rock, and as the rope snapped, the pipeline below was smashed open, causing a large outpouring of lake water and a widespread water outage in the residential area. Yet this did nothing to deter the enthusiasm of tourists visiting the island. The next day, the authorities repaired the pipeline and restored the water supply. Despite numerous residents protesting against the excessive development of the island, the local largest pharmaceutical company turned a blind eye. The CEO was even planning to hold a celebration on the island in 3 days. The local police officer, Katan, looked troubled, saying that the approval process for the event was stuck with the chief medical officer, Singh, a stubborn and traditional person. But the CEO didn't care about that. If the paperwork didn't come through, Katan could forget about his desired transfer off the island. Little did they know, the reason Dr. Singh didn't approve the event was that the hospital had recently admitted 11 patients with strange symptoms. Not only were they running a fever, but they also had black rashes on their bodies. Dr. Singh had scoured the records and found only a brief mention of similar cases back in 1989. After several residents died, the disease suddenly disappeared. The new assistant doctor, Ritu, was puzzled by Dr. Singh's apprehension, to which she gravely explained that the unknown is always the most terrifying. Moreover, tens of thousands of people were expected to visit the island soon, and if the situation wasn't clarified before then, it could lead to a disaster. Thankfully, after 2 days of continuous antibiotic treatment, the patients stopped having fevers, although they sometimes hiccuped inexplicably. Assistant Dr. Ritu found that their residences were in 3 different locations, which didn't seem to indicate a concentrated infection. At that moment, a regular patient came to say goodbye to Dr. Singh and casually noticed the black rash in the report. She mentioned that someone in her village had the same strange disease. Although the rash quickly disappeared, a few days later, the person died suddenly. A shiver ran through Dr. Singh. After getting the address of the deceased's family, she decided to visit them immediately. But many years had passed, and the son of the deceased didn't remember the details. But just before Dr. Singh left, the man recalled that his father started hiccuping after the fever subsided, and then died suddenly a couple of days later. Dr. Singh was shocked to hear that. She urgently notified her staff to prevent the patients from being discharged from the hospital. Suddenly, a van sped toward her. It was Officer Katan. He had come to persuade Dr. Singh to approve the application for the festival celebration, claiming that all the regulations conformed to the World Health Organization's standards. However, Singh was non-committal. She didn't think Katan would be so invested. It turns out Katan had been transferred to this backward island from a major city police department because of corruption. Singh's retort left Katan speechless. Back in the ward, Singh was on the verge of a breakdown. Only one of the 11 patients had not been discharged, and she had a bad feeling. She hurried to the hospital director, requesting to call back the 10 patients who had gone home. Naturally, he refused. As they argued, the island's governor made a surprise visit. Dr. Singh quickly presented the investigation report, suggesting that the 11 patients might have been infected with an unknown virus, and their lives were at risk. But Officer Katan found the idea ridiculous, believing that it was not possible to cancel the island's grandest festival. The governor told him to shut up his smelly mouth, and they had to follow the experts' advice. But then he changed his tone, saying that in the last 7 days, only 11 people had been infected, and they had all now recovered and been discharged. He couldn't cancel an annual celebration that tens of thousands of people would attend based on baseless speculation. Seizing the moment, Katan produced a photo of a local troublemaker with some of the patients, claiming a thug had admitted to selling fake alcohol at a bar days earlier. The infections could very likely be due to the poor quality alcohol. Dr. Singh tried to argue, but the governor made the final summary. He felt that poverty was far more frightening than these diseases. Singh, left with no choice, signed her name on the approval document for the festival. Afterward, she rushed to inform the last patient about the discharge, cautioning them to avoid cheap counterfeit alcohol. To her surprise, the patient said they never drank alcohol. Singh's face showed shock as she realized the so-called investigation was a fabrication by Officer Katan. She couldn't sit still any longer. She ran to the discharged patients' homes in the middle of the night, only to find the village eerily quiet. Pushing open a door, she found a patient lying breathless on the bed. As she ran out to find help, she realized the neighbors were also silent. Several burnt-out piles of bodies were in the center of the clearing. Without a doubt, all the villagers were dead. Suddenly, noises came from the nearby pipeline. Singh went to investigate and found a little girl weakly crying for water. She quickly scooped up a bowl of lake water to give to the girl, but the child pushed it away. Just then, it started to rain lightly. The girl, as if she hadn't drunk for days, eagerly opened her mouth to catch the raindrops. Singh had an epiphany, thinking that there must be something wrong with the lake water. Looking at the water pipeline stretching into the residential area, she felt a chill running down her spine to her butt. Meanwhile, Assistant Ritu was researching on the computer and was startled to discover that the residences of all 11 patients were located around the lake, the local water source. Dr. Singh, who had come to the same realization, was frantic. With no cell signal in the mountains, she had no choice but to set out on foot in search of the main water valve. She hoped that by cutting off the water supply, she could save the lives of thousands. The mountain path was treacherous, and she slipped, tumbling down the slope and striking her head on a boulder, nearly losing consciousness. Despite this, Dr. Singh crawled forward, determined to break the pipeline with a stone. But her efforts were as futile as those of the natives who had tried to destroy the pipeline with boulders before her. No one could stop the contaminated water from reaching countless homes. This shows that a great disaster was looming. Early the next morning, the hospital director announced that just hours before, Dr. Singh's body had been found by the freshwater lake. Ritu was shocked, guessing that she had gone to investigate the unknown disease the night before. So she hurried to inform the director that the disease's transmission was likely due to the lake water. The director was stunned. That morning, the police had discovered that all the residents of a lakeside village were dead. Ritu was shocked and believed it was imperative to notify the island's residents. The director, however, shook his head in bitterness. The lake water was used by 500,000 residents of the neighboring islands. The two reported to the governor. Tests had already confirmed the presence of an unknown supervirus in the lake water. The 11 discharged patients were also confirmed dead, which meant that the antibiotics were ineffective against this virus. Furthermore, it could be transmitted through the bodily fluids of infected individuals. At this moment, a server brought in several glasses of water, which everyone ignored as they continued to discuss fervently. The governor's deputy thought the hospital director was being alarmist, claiming that the festival had received significant investment and couldn't just be canceled. The director, feeling exhausted, suggested the deputy drink some tap water as a test, which he hesitated to do before finally sealing the bottle. The governor made a decisive call. He decided to initiate a health safety red alert. However, to avoid panic among island visitors, the situation had to be kept strictly confidential. The stoppage of the water supply would be explained as a drill, and all island residents would undergo screening and quarantine observation. Ritu, formally educated, felt it was necessary to report the situation promptly, but was quickly met with disdain from several higher-ups. The police chief relayed the order to seal off their respective areas. Officer Katan sensed something was wrong. It was the day the festival was supposed to start, a time when security forces were needed most, but the authorities initiate a blockade drill now. Recalling Dr. Singh's earlier mention of a contagious disease, he quickly realized that a major crisis was unfolding on the island. Meanwhile, the festival grounds were already crowded with out-of-town visitors, none of whom noticed that some people in the corner were beginning to feel unwell. The tourists were too engrossed in the performances to pay attention. Suddenly, several police and ambulance vehicles burst onto the scene, dividing the vast crowd into sections. Faced with agitated tourists, they weakly explained that a medical drill was taking place. As people entered the examination tents and saw the scene of readiness, no one could believe it was just an ordinary drill. Back at the hospital, Ritu looked at Dr. Singh's pale face and felt that her sacrifice could not be in vain. She once again suggested to the director that the public had a right to know that their lives were at risk. However, the director could only spread his hands helplessly. He was just following orders. Ritu couldn't help but take out her phone, staring at the screen in silence. Officer Katan was at the celebration square, having arrived there not long before. Instead of joining his colleagues to cordon off the crowd, he headed straight to the pharmaceutical company's office building. Upon finding the CEO, Katan shared his suspicion that the entire island would soon be quarantined. With a flight due to land in half an hour, it might be everyone's last chance to evacuate. His only request was that the CEO remember to transfer him, as Katan had always seen this place as a prison surrounded by the sea. Downstairs in the headquarters lobby, a large group of people, unable to leave, gathered in front of the glass doors in protest. Suddenly, someone spotted the CEO and other executives preparing to leave through the back door. The crowd instantly erupted, all rushing over, hoping to escape with them. Seeing the situation deteriorating, Officer Katan stepped forward and fired a warning shot. Although this calmed the situation temporarily, panic began to spread among the people. Shortly after, the glass doors were smashed open, and the tourists surged out. The police's containment plan had utterly failed. Without a doubt, an unknown pathogen would now rapidly spread across the island. A little girl got separated from her brother in the tumult, but was rescued just in time by a local named Yotsna, who then whisked the siblings away from the chaos in her car. Meanwhile, under Officer Katan's escort, the pharmaceutical company's executives quickly reached the airport's waiting area. Watching the airplane descend, they all breathed a sigh of relief, ready to leave the cursed island at last. At the same time, Dr. Ritu walked into the governor's office, admitting that she had reported the outbreak to the health department. She claimed that everyone had the right to know when their lives were in danger. The governor sighed, saying he had not intended to hide the truth, but to buy time for the tourists to evacuate. Now that the outbreak was known, the entire island would certainly be locked down. As expected, the incoming plane suddenly retracted its landing gear and ascended into the sky, leaving the island a true open-air prison. Starting today, all residents and tourists had to stay indoors, with signals cut and supplies distributed by the authorities. The hospitals, overwhelmed by the number of infected, were beyond capacity, but that wasn't the worst of it. The outbreak had spread to all the habitable islands, with no facility big enough to accommodate tens of thousands of tourists. Then came more bad news from the police chief, saying they discovered that while building a water pipeline, the pharmaceutical company had secretly executed a project, the details of which remained unknown. The governor quickly focused on the issue, ordering the police chief to lead an investigation. The unappreciated Katan was reassigned to distributing water to residents on the streets. Once a haughty official, he switched to a people's servant upon seeing the police chief drive up. The chief coldly instructed him to fill the buckets with water, as he had more pressing matters to attend to. Katan, keeping one step ahead, stealthily opened the car's document box when unobserved and discovered a report on the secretive project. He quickly snapped photos with his phone and then hurried to the CEO's villa. After going through several disinfection processes, he finally met the island's most influential figure. Katan presented the photos from his phone, hinting that the police were covertly investigating the company, hoping to demonstrate his importance. However, he was dismissed without any consideration. Leaving the villa, Katan found a box of medicine on the ground. Out of curiosity, he inquired at a pharmacy and learned it was for preventing seasickness. A bad feeling grew within him, and rightly so. When he returned to the CEO's villa that evening, he found it empty. While snooping around, he was suddenly knocked unconscious. Early the next morning, the governor received more bad news. The pharmaceutical company's executives had vanished en masse. They were last seen near the harbor, and it was highly likely that they had fled by boat. The governor initially believed it was impossible because the sea routes had been patrolled and sealed off, with only supplies allowed in and out. He demanded that the police chief bring them back at all costs. If the island's residents found out that the wealthy had escaped, it would undoubtedly cause widespread panic. Officer Katan was quickly summoned to the chief's office. He had already explained many times that he had been knocked out at the CEO's villa. By the time he woke up, they were already gone. The chief told Katan to abandon any illusions he had. With the CEO now in trouble, there was no chance of help in returning to the mainland. The chief mocked Katan, calling him a lying swindler, which left him feeling dejected. Suddenly, Katan stated that telling the truth comes at a cost, and he began to recount an incident from 5 years earlier. Back then, Katan was ordered to investigate a significant corruption case. However, his superior directed him to alter the figures involved to lessen the punishment for the accused. Katan, steadfast in his integrity, refused to sign the altered documents and reported his superior's crimes to the disciplinary committee. Unbeknownst to him, his superior had immense influence and had even bribed Katan's colleagues who were involved in the investigation, as well as the witnesses. As a result, Katan was the one charged with abuse of authority and subsequently dispatched to serve on this isolated island. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a subordinate reporting that a container truck headed for the harbor had been hijacked by locals. Before the chief could respond, Katan realized that these containers belonged to the pharmaceutical company. The fleeing executives could very well be hiding inside the containers at the harbor. If they had set sail, the Coast Guard would have undoubtedly noticed. The chief thought this made sense and immediately sent his men to search. Sure enough, before long, the police captured the company's executives hiding in the containers. Katan and the police chief both felt relieved. However, they soon faced another problem. The group of executives remained tight-lipped and refused to disclose their destination. Katan volunteered for the task, confident in his understanding of their weaknesses and his ability to get them to talk. He did not disappoint. Shortly after, the executives provided coordinates. The governor quickly consulted a map and discovered that the location was an island overseas. Since they couldn't return to the mainland, the pharmaceutical company had purchased the island for a substantial sum, planning to secretly wait out the epidemic there. The governor thought it would be wise to let the executives go. The island was habitable and outside mainland jurisdiction, making it a perfect place to send the displaced tourists. However, the pharmaceutical company would have to supply all the necessary provisions. Katan doubted the CEO would agree to this, but the governor assigned him to convince them. He was told that any conditions could be negotiated. Dr. Ritu was not punished for reporting the epidemic on her own initiative, but was sidelined by the hospital director. However, Ritu actively sought a cure for the disease. She discovered that much of Dr. Singh's research materials had gone missing. So under the cover of night, Ritu quietly entered her home and indeed found extensive research materials on the desk, including methods to treat the plague. Surprisingly, Dr. Singh had conducted extensive investigations in secret. She learned that in 1989, when black pustules appeared, some local residents used wild plants to alleviate their symptoms. Dr. Singh found that these plants contained a special protease, but they had become extinct after 1991. Ritu immediately reported this to the director, saying the plant that could potentially cure the plague had once existed on the island and couldn't have just disappeared. She decided to search the mountains herself, but the director, already overwhelmed by the shortage of hospital staff, had no interest in research. So Ritu enlisted the help of two colleagues and ventured deep into the island's mountains. However, when they reached the village where the special plant had been discovered years ago, they found nothing but wasteland. Ashamed, Ritu returned to apologize to the director, her only intention having been to save the infected residents. The director resigned, told her to take care of the patients in the wards instead. At that moment, Officer Katan arrived to have his head wound rechecked and unexpectedly found the police chief also present. The chief took Katan aside, saying that through his investigation, he had found out Katan was framed in a corruption case 5 years ago, but he was only transferred here 2 years ago, indicating that's not the reason for why he was transferred to this island. Katan had to confess the truth. It turned out he was the senior officer who had tried to protect the criminals, and the one who had refused to bow to dark forces was a new, honest officer. Based on this revelation, the chief had to reevaluate the investigation Katan made into the pharmaceutical company. Without choice, Katan revealed that he hadn't been knocked out the night the company's executives left. Instead, he had concocted an escape plan for them by pretending to be captured in the containers, eventually revealing the overseas island location. This would force the governor to relent and let them take the tourists to the island. The CEO's wife suggested why not just go to the governor and propose a deal. Katan then shared that according to his plan, it was now the governor who would be asking for their help, and any conditions favorite for them could be opportunistically proposed. After the revelation, the police chief finally undertook why Katan could achieve so much today, because it was all his doing. Katan was now confident, knowing that even if the chief knew the truth, he couldn't do anything because Katan was key in brokering the deal. What he hadn't anticipated was that the CEO's wife, while washing up, discovered black pustules on the back of her neck. She had also been infected with the unknown virus. Although Katan's negotiation went smoothly and the governor agreed to all the pharmaceutical company's conditions, including stopping the investigation into the secretive project, the company had to take the tourists to the island within 6 days. Suddenly, the CEO declared that if his wife couldn't board the ship, then no one would set sail, as the overseas island was privately purchased by his wife's family. Katan was close to madness, saying the disease was incurable, but the CEO didn't care and demanded that Katan quickly find a solution, or else no one would survive. Meanwhile, Ritu was sorting through Dr. Singh's belongings when she stumbled upon a photo of a patient. She thought the pattern in the background looked familiar. After much thought, Ritu found a photo of the unique plant and traced the path of its stems and leaves with a ballpoint pen. To her amazement, the pattern she drew was identical to the one in the patient's photo. She realized that the miraculous plant had not vanished. It had been preserved as a symbol by certain people. Officer Katan was scratching his head in frustration. There was no specific medicine for this virus, so he had no choice but to look for alternatives. He sought help from Dr. Ritu, and to his surprise, she had actually made a discovery. The plant, which contained a special ingredient, might be able to treat the disease. Although records indicated it was extinct, the totem of the local Oraka tribe bore a striking resemblance to it. Maybe they knew where to find this peculiar plant. Reinvigorated, Katan immediately dispatched a large police force to the Oraka territory, only to be hit with more bad news. The governor received reports that the Oraka tribe had vanished. Inquiries made by closely related residents revealed that the tribe claimed a powerful curse had descended on Earth, prompting them to move deeper into the jungle. Anxious upon hearing this, the governor ordered the forestry department to find them at any cost. The tribe had survived on the island for thousands of years, enduring widespread outbreaks of cholera and measles without extinction. Naturally, they could not just disappear during the governor's tenure. Unlucky Katan, having drawn a blank at the Oraka tribe's territory, could now only lead his men in a widespread search for their whereabouts. Elsewhere, Jyotsna, who had rescued a little girl at an event, saw that the tourist siblings had nowhere to go and reluctantly took them into her own home. The little girl woke up from a nightmare in the middle of the night, crying to find her mother. Jyotsna then learned that before the outbreak, the girl's parents had left the two siblings in the care of locals and went sightseeing on a neighboring island. Now, with all routes between the islands cut off, the family was cruelly separated. With no experience in childcare, Jyotsna was at her wit's end, not knowing what to do. To make matters worse, she learned from the brother that his sister suffered from intermittent epilepsy and needed to take medication on time. But in the rush to leave, the siblings' medicine was running low. Jyotsna had no choice but to use her radio to call for help. Her friend quickly offered several suggestions. There was a pharmacy not far from Jyotsna's house where she could look for medicine. If that failed, she should go to his uncle, who lived deep in the mountains, where supplies and medicine were abundant and the sparse population would undoubtedly be safer than here. Anxious, Jyotsna didn't dare delay and slipped out of the house under the cover of night. Due to the curfew, the streets were deserted, with no pedestrians in sight, only containers collecting rainwater. Jyotsna hurried to the pharmacy on the street corner. While rifling through the medicine cabinet, she was shocked to see bloodstains on the floor and an injured resident lying in the corner. After questioning, she learned that he had ventured out in search of water, and when found by the patrolling police, he had hidden here. Jyotsna, coming from a medical background, skillfully stitched up his wounds. But just then, a patrolling officer arrived. Jyotsna quickly stepped out of the room, explaining that she was there to find medicine for a critically ill patient, and managed to deceive him by showing her physician's work ID. In this way, Jyotsna escorted the injured man to the entrance of the community, not only giving him anti-inflammatory medicine, but also her only bottle of water. As Jyotsna rushed back home in a hurry, she found the little girl's epilepsy had flared up again. She realized that this was no place to stay for long, so she decided to leave with the siblings and seek help from her friend's uncle who lived deep in the mountains. They followed the map and finally stopped in front of an abandoned bunker. Surprisingly, her friend's reclusive uncle lived there, having cut himself off from the world for years, and he had a standoffish demeanor towards strangers. But the reclusive man insisted that he was right in his ways, which is why he had survived through several epidemics. After the reclusive man's introduction, they learned that the bunker was a remnant from World War II, stocked with ample supplies and medicine, and even housed numerous antiques. Jyotsna found a notebook left by an officer, which the reclusive man had already read. He informed everyone that this virus had actually appeared during World War II, causing the sudden death of many foreign soldiers. During their searches, they accidentally discovered that the local Oraka tribe seemed unaffected by the virus, though the exact reasons were unknown. After all, the tribe had been surviving on this island for over 7,000 years. The little girl kept asking when she would see her parents again. What she didn't know was that there might no longer be any hope of seeing them again, as they were now stranded on another scenic island, with the ferry service already banned by the authorities. To make matters worse, the girl's mother had recently shown symptoms of infection and was now being treated in the hospital. Although she seemed in good spirits, the hospital staff took no chances and asked her to stay for another 2 days of observation. The mother revealed her regret for leaving in such a hurry that she forgot to give her daughter the juice in her backpack. Meanwhile, the two siblings' father, Santosh, was persistently urging the tour guide, Prabhu, to arrange a ferry back to the main island. But Prabhu was at his wits' end since all the travel agency's boats had been seized by the authorities. Just then, he saw a Tesla boat slowly approaching the shore. Rushing up to inquire, he learned it was a fishing boat secretly kept by a local family. Prabhu expressed his desire to rent it, and the fisherman, with a sharp business sense, tripled the rental fee. Prabhu was not one to be taken advantage of. He agreed to the boat owner's price and then found the desperate Santosh, hiking up the rental cost by 10 times. They arranged to leave by boat the next afternoon. The tour bus driver thought Prabhu was inhumane for exploiting such distressed parents. It was as if he had an epiphany, saying that they had done too many unscrupulous things over the years, and now it's time for them to face the consequences. After this, he revealed the black rash on the back of his neck. It turned out the driver was also infected with the virus. His fate was sealed, and he was destined to remain on this isolated island forever. Early the next morning, Prabhu took Santosh to put down a deposit with the boat owner, but to their dismay, after taking the money, the owner backed out, saying someone else had offered a higher price and needed to leave the island first. Prabhu was furious, boasting about his background and ready to flex some muscle, only to end up with a solid punch to his running nose. Santosh could only console Prabhu, reminding him that they couldn't leave for the next couple of days anyway because his sick wife had to be discharged from the hospital first. However, when Santosh visited his wife that afternoon, to his horror, she began to hiccup, a sign that her illness was entering its final stage. He panicked, accusing her of lying about her condition improving. He couldn't bear the thought of living alone without her. His wife, trying to comfort him, insisted she believed he could do it and asked him to go on to give their children a better life. That very night, Santosh's wife passed away, leaving behind only a pair of shoes and a box of juice. The tour guide Prabhu witnessed everything. The next morning, he hurried over to tell Santosh it's time for them to leave. Indeed, it takes a rogue to outsmart another. Prabhu had taken advantage of the boat owner's piggy slumber, stealthily making off with the boat. He owed Santosh too much and was determined to help him return to the main island to find his children. But as they neared their destination, a massive storm hit, and their small boat fell into chaos on the water. The next day, when they awoke, they found the Tesla boat had been pushed by the waves onto an uninhabited island. With no fuel left, they had no choice but to go ashore. When Prabhu accidentally discovered a circular mark on a tree, he realized where they were. It was the dwelling place of the local Oraka tribe. Following a path, they soon came upon several abandoned camp tents, but there was no sign of people. Santosh spotted a water bottle and was about to take a drink when Prabhu knocked it out of his hands. Prabhu had found the campers' bodies. The water was undoubtedly prepared before the virus outbreak. Nearby, there were scattered turtle eggs. Prabhu explained that these poachers not only stole animal eggs, but also dug pits to trap large beasts. Reviewing the footage on their cameras, Prabhu said that these poachers committed all sorts of evils, often tricking the Oraka people into drinking alcohol and taking advantage of them. The video showed the tribespeople also drinking from the water bottle, indicating they might have succumbed to the virus. Suddenly, a multitude of turtle eggs spilled from Prabhu's backpack. Santosh shook his head in disbelief, realizing that Prabhu was also a poacher, which explained his familiarity with the poaching trade. It dawned on Santosh that Prabhu's insistence on getting him and his wife to visit the island was primarily to steal eggs. Santosh felt like smashing the bottle over his head and immediately turned to leave the deceitful tour guide. However, before he got far, he stumbled into a vast animal trap. Prabhu hesitated for a long time before following him. Although he didn't find Santosh, he saw a glow of fire in the jungle. Approaching it, he found the long-lost Oraka tribe, including some individuals drinking merrily from the poacher's cup, seemingly unaffected by the virus. Prabhu chanced upon their location but chose not to make a fuss. Instead, he silently slipped away from the dense jungle and was rescued by a transport team by the roadside. Prabhu finally made it back home safely. However, as he just stepped through the door, a neighbor told Prabhu that his mother had died from the virus. Staring at the urn with her ashes in the bottle, it took Prabhu a long time to come to terms with reality. He learned from the neighbor that his mother was the first to discover the Oraka people's relocation because she had a good relationship with the tribe. So she ventured deep into the forest to offer help, but unfortunately she contracted the virus and died a few days later. Overwhelmed by emotions at the sight of his mother's belongings, Prabhu broke down in tears like a giant baby. He remembered his mother had selflessly helped the Oraka people who turned out to be immune to the virus and were still thriving, while his mother had succumbed to the virus infection. The renewed grief for his father, who had also died years earlier while assisting the Oraka people, fueled his resentment. So he vowed to make the primitive tribe pay. The scene shifts to the jungle, where an Oraka person spots a strong light in the distance. Approaching, they discover a modern, crafted mirror. Just as they reach to pick it up, the hiding Prabhu strikes with a blunt club. He drags the unconscious Oraka person to a cabin in the woods. Unable to communicate due to the language barrier, Prabhu brings in a translator. Curious as to why the Oraka are immune, he's met with a cryptic response about the ancestors being angry. Feeling deceived, Prabhu beats the Oraka person, venting his anger and accusing them of causing his parents to pay a heavy price. The translator rushes to check on the injuries, only to hear the Oraka person say that Prabhu is hurt much deeper than him. When Prabhu wakes up from his slumber, he finds the Oraka person gone, freed by the translator. Rushing outside, he sees a figure in the distance and follows without delay. He doesn't find who he's looking for, but instead stumbles upon a search party led by Officer Katan. Someone finds an Oraka talisman on him, which causes suspicion since only true tribe members are supposed to wear it. Prabhu quickly explains that it was a gift from his mother, who had good relations with the local tribe, but then he feels something is amiss. After the search party leaves, he finds another talisman on the ground. Without a doubt, the missing Oraka person is nearby. Prabhu soon finds him, followed by several police officers from the search team. The Oraka person is effortlessly caught and begins to hum a sacred song from their tribe. Prabhu's eyes widened in shock because he grew up listening to his mother sing that very song. Watching the Oraka person's retreating figure, a strong unease rises in Prabhu. He begins to doubt his own origins and runs back to inquire. With a heavy sigh, his grandfather reveals that Prabhu's mother selflessly helped the Oraka people because she received the most precious gift from them. It's Prabhu himself. The scene flashes back to over 20 years ago when Prabhu's parents were on their way home. They stumbled upon an Oraka tribesperson seeking help. His wife was pregnant and about to give birth. Upon inquiry, Prabhu's father learned there was more to the story. It turned out that the wife had been impregnated by a poacher, and according to tribal customs, she would be burned to death even after delivering the child. So the couple had secretly fled to seek assistance from the residents. Prabhu's parents reassured them that they would do everything in their power to ensure the child's safety. But just a few days later, when Prabhu's mother returned to the forest cabin with food, she found the Oraka tribesperson hanging outside, and Prabhu's father was lying on the ground covered in blood. He explained that the pregnant Oraka tribesperson had been taken by her people and urged his wife to quickly seek police help. That night, the police notified Prabhu's parents that the pregnant Oraka tribesperson had been found. But when Prabhu's mother opened the curtains, she saw only a dying mother who pointed to the cradle beside her. Inside was a sleeping infant. Before her death, the Oraka mother had given her pendant to the woman. The man learned from the police that after the Oraka woman gave birth, the tribe intended to burn both mother and child. But the police arrived in time to save the unharmed child. The couple grew to love Prabhu dearly and decided to raise him as their own son. At this revelation, Prabhu was in tears, unable to believe that he was the descendant of the Oraka people, especially since he had previously assisted the police in capturing one of the tribespeople. A tidal wave of guilt overwhelmed him. On the other hand, Santosh, who had fallen into a pit trap, finally awoke from unconsciousness. He saw an anthill not far away that looked like a human figure and retreated in fear. He tried to stand up, only to realize that his right foot was severely injured, making it nearly impossible to climb out anytime soon. As his water supply had run out, he found some juice left for his daughter by his wife. Hesitated, he then put it back in the bag. Given his situation, Santosh could only hope that someone would come to rescue him. He tried to throw stones to attract attention, but there were hardly any left to throw, and no response came from outside the pit. Then he found a mortar, but as he was inspecting it, a venomous snake emerged from a hole he hadn't noticed. Santosh pleaded for mercy in panic, and miraculously the snake retreated into the hole. This gave Santosh a new idea. He chiseled a few holes in the wall and used them as footholds to climb up. Unfortunately, his injured ankle let him down, and he fell back into the pit. When he awoke again, night had fallen, and he saw snake eggs in front of the hole. As he picked them up, the same snake reared its head. This time, driven by desperation, Santosh smashed it with a rock, eliminating his greatest threat. Hungry, he started eating the snake eggs, forgetting that he had criticized Prabhu for stealing eggs during the day. Indeed, when pushed to the brink, all sense of morality can be cast aside. The next day, a groggy Santosh awoke to see his son and daughter urging him to keep going, or else they would never see each other again. These words filled Santosh with tremendous courage. He turned his head towards the anthill and smeared clay over his stomach to withstand the painful bites of the ants. The pain also fueled his determination, and he finally managed to climb out of the damned pit through the holes he had previously dug. At that moment, he saw his wife waving to him. Instinctively moving towards her, Santosh quickly drifted into a sweet slumber. When he awoke again, he found himself in a church converted into a sanctuary. The old man told him that he had been found unconscious in the jungle, fortunately discovered by a ranger who was searching the mountains and brought here. Santosh did not dwell on his good fortune because all his attention was captured by the pink water cup. When he picked it up, he saw his daughter's name engraved on it, and his face lit up with excitement. The current owner of the cup was the very man whom Jyotsna had rescued earlier. He reassured Santosh that Jyotsna was kind, having mentioned taking in a brother and sister. However, the pharmacy was quite a distance away, about a 7-hour drive. Santosh was already forming a plan in his mind. He needed to reunite with his children as soon as possible. Unbeknownst to him, at that very moment, the siblings were in a jungle bunker facing a grave crisis. The brother had encountered a seemingly friendly wild mountain cat the night he arrived. He had reluctantly shared half of his scarce food with the animal. The next morning, however, he found the cat dead in the bushes with black liquid around its mouth. A sense of foreboding washed over him as he shakily touched the back of his neck, confirming he too had contracted the terrible virus. He then yelled for his sister to stay away, knowing he could not stay with her any longer. After donning a mask, he took one last look at his sleeping sister and resolutely left the bunker. To his surprise, the reclusive man had been waiting outside for a long time. He had already discovered the infected cat and guessed that the girl's brother must have been infected as well. The thought of his sister being left alone and his own existence fading after death filled him with an indescribable sadness. The man told him that his own child had died 20 years ago, but he still remembered their tears and smiles, proving that people do not disappear after death. They live on in the hearts of their loved ones and friends. This comforted the boy, and just as he was about to say goodbye, the reclusive man stood up, insisting on accompanying the boy on his final journey, regretting that he had not been by his son's side in his last moments. When Jyotsna woke up in the cellar, she found that the boy had vanished, leaving behind a note explaining the situation. Not daring to tell the little girl the truth, she took the medicine and supplies and led the girl down the mountain. With few acquaintances in the village, Jyotsna could only seek help from her friend Prabhu. She had heard on the radio that the authorities were organizing trips for tourists to an overseas island, so she decided to ask Prabhu to lend his car to take the girl to the dock. In the past, he would have charged for such a favor, but now he handed over his car keys without hesitation. Prabhu had no desires left, except to find the captured Oraka person and apologize to him in person. Jyotsna surmised that the Oraka person might have been taken to the hospital for examination. With her nursing license, she might be able to get Prabhu into the hospital. But unexpectedly, the Oraka person in the hospital was about to be subjected to biopsy studies. Dr. Ritu had found a special substance in his blood that could inhibit the unknown virus, possibly explaining their immunity to diseases. Ritu immediately reported this to the governor's deputy, who told her not to dwell on the matter. Finding antiviral plants was no longer important because the Oraka person was the cure. The critically ill CEO's wife needed an urgent treatment. Otherwise, tens of thousands of tourists would not be able to travel to the overseas island for refuge. However, extracting the Oraka person's cerebrospinal fluid was extremely risky, with less than a 30% chance of survival. A group of officials went to the hospital room to ask the Oraka person if he would sacrifice himself to save the tens of thousands of tourists on the island. Bound by a moral dilemma, the man ultimately delivered his assent, but on one condition: that his people would no longer be harmed. The hospital director made the promise at once. They had no reason to do otherwise. Yet the Oraka person added that their ancestors' homeland had been destroyed, angering their forebears and bringing disease upon them. Officer Katan found the last word familiar and immediately summoned the translator to his office. The translator explained that the Oraka person's ancestral homeland was actually their burial ground, which they would integrate into the jungle by planting vegetation over it. Katan was struck with a thought and decided to lead a team to the burial ground. The hospital director here has already started preparing the antidote. After much deliberation, the decision was made to assign the task to Dr. Ritu, as she, apart from the late Dr. Singh, is now the most knowledgeable about this unknown virus. The lives of millions weigh heavily on her, leaving her with no reason to refuse. On the other side, Jyotsna is preparing to take Prabhu to the hospital to seek the Oraka people's forgiveness. Before leaving, she instructed the little girl to stay at home, who responded that she still had to complete her summer homework of collecting plants. She then took out the notebook the reclusive man had left behind. Jyotsna didn't dwell on it and quickly arrived at the city center hospital with Prabhu. They found the director and expressed their wish to meet the Oraka person. However, since surgery was about to start, the director refused. When Prabhu heard that the Oraka man was about to have his cerebrospinal fluid extracted, his guilt deepened. He suddenly shouted out, declaring himself also a Oraka and willing to undergo the surgery in their place. The director was shocked. Putting aside whether Prabhu could actually be immune to the virus, taking someone else's place in surgery could be fatal. Prabhu had thought it through. He had lived a life full of deceit and was not willing to spend the rest of his life in regret. His sincerity moved the director, and after a series of checks confirmed that Prabhu was fit for surgery, Ritu began extracting his cerebrospinal fluid. Fortunately, Prabhu survived, although the physical pain was hard to alleviate quickly. Next was to inject the patient with the viral antibodies, but unexpectedly, the CEO's wife began to convulse during the procedure. Under immense pressure, Dr. Ritu insisted on continuing the operation, simply performing routine fever reduction on her. As it turned out, Ritu's decision was spot on. The patient successfully made it through the critical period, and the virus in her body rapidly declined. Ritu's worries finally dissipated, and she collapsed on the floor, exhausted. Jyotsna rushed over to comfort her. During the conversation, Ritu happened to mention a special plant that could cure diseases. Jyotsna suddenly realized that this was the plant noted in the reclusive man's notebook, along with its specific location. However, the officials were unaware of this. The success of the antidote was a surprise to them. Prabhu, being a half-blooded Oraka, had cerebrospinal fluid that was enough to cure 4 critically ill patients. With over 400 pure-blooded Orakas on the island, it was unimaginable how many patients this could cure and potentially end the epidemic. Yet the director opposed this, stating that it would surely lead to the mass death of the Oraka people, and they would not agree. The police chief was tough, saying they had no right to refuse. The assistant added that sacrificing a few hundred of them could save tens of thousands of lives, a trade-off that was well worth it. However, the final decision was up to the governor. Meanwhile, upon hearing that the special plant still existed, Ritu was thrilled, confident that she could develop an antidote within weeks if she could find a plant sample. But Jyotsna quickly dampened her spirits, saying she had to take the little girl to the harbor dock before she could accompany Ritu to search for the special plant, and the notebook was also in the other party's hands. Ritu understood her feelings and handed Jyotsna a satellite phone to keep in touch. The little girl's father, Santosh, in an effort to find his children as soon as possible, concocted a lie to deceive the driver and stole an ambulance to leave the church. But not far away, Santosh heard a noise in the back of the vehicle. Opening the door, he found a patient still on the stretcher. With urgent matters to attend to, he had no choice but to leave the person by the roadside. However, as he was about to reach his destination, he was stopped by the checkpoint guards, who were sent with an emergency task since several infected people had died in the residential area, and Santosh was ordered to hurry over with the ambulance to transport the bodies. Poor Santosh had to comply and only reached the body collection point at dusk. While moving the bodies, he overheard someone lamenting how pitiful the deceased was, who died alone with his parents staying on other islands. Santosh was struck and realized the body before him was his son. He managed to compose himself, loading the body into the vehicle. Once the door was closed, he could no longer hold back the urge to cry as waves of regret washed over him. Suddenly, a police officer's questioning voice came from outside. Santosh gathered his emotions and stepped out of the vehicle. At that moment, the reclusive man appeared with a note saying it's the boy's last words. Early the next morning, with a resolved spirit, Santosh decided to head to the harbor dock to search for his daughter, who was still among the living. Meanwhile, Officer Katan, upon arriving at the Oraka cemetery, was stunned by the sight before him. The once lush jungle had turned into a barren wasteland. The assistant, after reviewing the data, added that the peculiar plant capable of resisting the virus was last seen in this very place. It was then that someone discovered something in a pit. Upon examination, it turned out to be a pharmaceutical company's nameplate. Katan knew what to do next and ordered his men to collect soil samples for testing. The following day, Katan returned to the company's villa, this time with a much firmer stance. He had found evidence that the pharmaceutical company was the creator of the virus outbreak. Previously, when he heard the Orakas mention the cemetery with a certain word, it reminded him of the pharmaceutical company's secretive project, which sounded similar. Thus, Katan personally went to the cemetery to investigate and found traces of artificial development. Moreover, the soil contained a high concentration of the virus causing the epidemic. The Orakas, having endured several large-scale epidemics over 1,000 years, naturally carried the virus in their buried corpses. That's why they used to plant special plants to neutralize the virus. But the pharmaceutical company not only removed all the plants, but also unearthed the deeply buried virus, which, after several rainfalls, entered a nearby lake, causing tens of thousands of infections. Katan was curious, asking what exactly this secretive project is. The CEO's explanation was bitterly ironic. It turned out that some high-ranking official was scheduled to inspect the island, and to make a good impression, they planned to build a helipad in the scenic Oraka cemetery. But when the official changed his plans the last minute, the pharmaceutical company also abandoned the construction project. Fuming inside, Katan challenged him for not even considering what destroying the cemetery would do to the Orakas. The CEO was nonchalant, saying development is a process of destruction. The place where they were standing was once a forest years ago. He then swiftly changed the subject, advising Katan to perform well and promising to use his influence to facilitate Katan's transfer off the island as soon as he left. At that moment, someone came to report that the governor's deputy had arrived, accompanied by the hospital director. They were requesting the pharmaceutical company to develop an antidote for the virus on overseas islands, with the Orakas who had the antibodies being provided by the officials. The CEO agreed but insisted that the patent rights for the antidote must belong to the company, and specifically named Dr. Ritu as the lead researcher. Without hesitation, the governor's deputy assigned Katan to escort Ritu to the villa for the meeting. Katan knocked on the door of Ritu's dorm room. Ritu was thrilled to share that she had discovered traces of the special plant and was planning to set off right away to find it. Suddenly, Katan stopped her, offering to give her a lift. The unsuspecting Ritu realized something was amiss as they neared the CEO's villa. Confused by her questioning gaze, Katan deeply apologized. He explained that failing to bring Ritu to the villa would cost him his one opportunity for a transfer off the island. However, Ritu insisted that Katan was not that kind of person and pleaded for her release, as she needed to find the plant to save the patients. Katan, with a stern face, ignored her pleas and urged the driver to hurry. The scene shifted to the CEO's villa, where Katan sat alone on a sofa. It turned out that he ultimately let Ritu go. Faced with the CEO's inquiries, Katan revealed that Ritu was the only person who believed in him. He had never before felt the trust of another person. The CEO scolded him for being foolish, questioning whether he wanted to squander all his previous efforts and miss his sole chance to leave the island. Katan confessed that he had spent a lifetime being a fraud and now just wanted to be a good person. The CEO was left speechless and planned to force Katan to disclose Ritu's whereabouts. Before long, Katan was beaten to a pulp, yet he still refused to reveal any information about Ritu. At the island's only harbor, a large crowd of tourists was gathering, ready to evacuate. As long as they were not infected with the unknown virus, they could board the cruise ship to the overseas islands. Santosh, searching anxiously through the evacuation queue, was certain that his daughter was there. Indeed, he soon spotted a familiar figure, but the dense crowd quickly obscured her from view. Desperate, he rushed to the lectern at the office, grabbed the microphone, and began calling his daughter's name. Although this disrupted the order, it was effective. The forlorn Santosh finally reunited with his daughter. He took out a juice from his backpack, his wife's legacy, and lied to his daughter, saying her mother and brother had gone to a faraway place. Grateful to Jyotsna, Santosh prostrated himself in thanks, exclaiming that she was nothing short of a goddess reincarnated. Jyotsna's escort mission was complete, and now she would go to help Dr. Ritu find the special plant. Before leaving, she planned to take the reclusive man's notebook, but she froze when she noticed black spots on the little girl's neck. Jyotsna quickly pulled Santosh aside, certain that the girl was infected. The seizure medication had delayed the symptoms. She felt they should notify the hospital and prevent the girl from boarding. Santosh was unable to accept this reality and didn't know what to do. When he came to his senses, he realized Jyotsna had already taken the green wristband that signified passage from his daughter. Then Jyotsna pulled out a satellite phone and called Dr. Ritu, saying she would stay to care for the girl, urged Ritu to find the plant herself. As Jyotsna was about to give the plant's location, Santosh burst in. He begged her to conceal his daughter's condition, believing that there might be a chance for her overseas. But Jyotsna was aware that this would endanger the lives of thousands of passengers on the ship. Santosh refused to give up and desperately pleaded with her. Seeing that Jyotsna was resolute in reporting, he pulled her back into the room, and in a fit of desperation for his daughter's safety, he strangled her. The gratitude he once felt was now gone to the winds. Soon after, Jyotsna lay motionless. Santosh, tears streaming down his face, took the wristband from her, shouldered his backpack, and silently left the room. As Jyotsna's consciousness began to fade, she reminisced about the scenes from her school years at this very place. The class teacher had assigned homework, asking the students to collect plant seeds from their homes. Prabhu, ever the playful one back then, had even taken seeds from his mother's cherished collection. Although he couldn't name them, he joined Jyotsna in planting them in the school's flower bed. What neither of them expected was that the seed had already taken root and sprouted, and it was spotted by Santosh's daughter by chance. Due to the limited capacity of the cruise ship, the tourists not listed for the first round of transportation were shouting incessantly, but to no avail. Nothing could change the fact. Santosh and his infected daughter got on the transport vehicle to the harbor. He couldn't imagine the catastrophe his actions might bring, yet he guessed that if his daughter were left behind, her death was certain. The crowded deck was filled with refugees, with only the CEO of the pharmaceutical company and his wife entitled to the privacy of a cabin. As the ship's horn sounded brightly, the massive vessel carrying thousands of passengers left the harbor. They were unaware that hidden among the crowd was a virus patient. After 2 days of rest in the hospital, Prabhu was feeling much better. The translator brought the Oraka people to express their gratitude, which gave Prabhu great comfort. He had finally accomplished a form of self-redemption, but there were more important things to do, like taking the Oraka people back to their tribe. He knew the thoughts of those in power. If they didn't leave now, they would not know what trouble might arise later. The three of them sneaked into a supply vehicle intending to escape the city area, but were soon stopped by guards who had been alerted. The officials certainly did not intend to let them leave easily. At the same time, the police chief was explaining to the security officer that if Prabhu and the Oraka person were let go, they might never find the Oraka tribe again. The governor was exasperated. He had made it clear that it was not possible to harm the local natives just for a cure. The chief posed a moral question, asking if he wanted to be a good person or a competent leader. The scene shifted to Prabhu and his companions by the roadside, about to be taken away. They just received good news that the police had decided to let the three of them go. It seemed that the governor had made a merciful decision after all. They decided to return to the Oraka tribe immediately. The guide, with an injured foot, asked Prabhu and the tribespeople to go ahead, as he was just a side character anyway. But they hadn't gone far when the Oraka man sensed something was amiss. Checking that no one was around, he continued to lead Prabhu forward. There was a cave not far away. Passing through it would lead to the Oraka tribe's location. At the same time, the hospital director placed the cure's data in the governor's office. He was curious. Since there was no intention to confront the Oraka tribe, why collect this information? Out of the blue, the governor said he had changed his mind. Just as Prabhu arrived at the tribe, a group of fully armed soldiers surrounded them. It turned out they had been tracking them from behind, but luckily, the Oraka tribespeople had already evacuated. The director believed that the governor had made a grave mistake. Those Oraka people were the original inhabitants, and they were the real outsiders. The governor explained that he was a career politician, and to save the lives of tens of thousands, sacrificing a few hundred indigenous lives was deemed worthwhile. Anxious and waiting by the beach, Ritu couldn't receive any news from Jyotsna. It took great effort for her to finally learn about the antiviral plants, and she didn't want to miss this opportunity for nothing. Unconsciously, a memory surfaced in her mind. Although their family was wealthy, they were often mocked because of their low family status. Her father was optimistic and encouraged his daughter that since one cannot choose the cards they are dealt, they must learn to play them well. However, reality dealt him a harsh blow soon after. Some thugs came knocking, threatening to chop down the ancient tree in the Ritu family's yard. When Ritu's father tried to intervene, they slapped him across the face. Outraged, he planned to report the incident to the police, but his brother urged him to stay calm. Ritu's father had only recently become a department manager, an achievement no one in the family had ever reached before. He was advised not to let these thugs negatively impact his career. Though he was frustrated, he held back in the end. To his dismay, those people intensified their harassment, chopping down the ancient tree under the cover of night. His father was heartbroken for a long time, but still chose not to call the police. He even began to despair, thinking that Ritu's extensive education was useless as they would still be subjected to scorn and ridicule. However, Ritu disagreed. She believed that times had changed and that anyone who worked hard to achieve success would eventually earn the respect of others. Her father apologized to her with tears in his eyes and encouraged her to forge her own path, assuring her that she would eventually find her place in the world. Ritu's thoughts were suddenly interrupted. It turned out that the reclusive man, the owner of the diary, had come out. He had memorized the location of the antiviral plants long ago. The next moment, he steered a small boat, taking Ritu to the island where the plants were located. In the vast sea, they saw a huge cruise ship ahead, but no one noticed that among the pages of a little girl's homework book on the deck, a few leaves of the antiviral plant were tucked away, leaves she had previously picked from the school's flower bed. Back in the office, the governor was still instilling his survival philosophy into the hospital director. He said that what seemed like coincidental accidents were in fact predetermined. People must continuously adapt and evolve to survive. This was true for politicians like him and should be for the indigenous people. Little did they know, the Oraka tribes people were also discussing their strategy in their thatched huts. They felt it was time to fight back. The city dwellers had been cutting down their trees, encroaching on their land, and even releasing curses that caused diseases. The tribe had retreated time and again. Not long ago, they had destroyed the water pipelines in an attempt to prevent the city dwellers from getting sick from the virus. But in the end, those city people still wanted to exploit the tribe's bodies, the blood passed down from their ancestors. The elder Oraka recalled a legend from the tribe. Initially, they, like ordinary people, contracted the blackpox virus and faced certain death. One young man accidentally drank water contaminated by animal carcasses and was ostracized according to tribal law. Intending to die in a cave, he ate some leaves out of sheer hunger and miraculously emerged healthy from the cave. Thus, he became the first in the tribe to overcome the virus. This plant then became a sacred medicine for the Oraka tribe and a spiritual anchor. Over time, their blood developed antibodies. Hearing this, the Oraka people were filled with righteous indignation and decided to teach those city dwellers coveting their ancestors' blood a harsh lesson. Meanwhile, the soldiers invading the tribe were still scouring the area for any signs of the Oraka people when suddenly a child peeked out. Without a moment's hesitation, everyone gave chase. In the dense forest, they were no match for the native child, and before long, the child vanished on the beachside. The captured Oraka gave Prabhu a subtle signal, and together they dashed into the forest behind them. The soldiers pursued but quickly halted their advance because a large group of Oraka emerged, armed and ready. Their counterattack against the city dwellers had officially begun. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.